Yeah, how does China, like, throughout the ages, is there sort of a difference in who writes, or it's always the elites?
Um, the official history are written actually by the next dynasty, the dynasty that comes into power. Part of them gaining
No,
legit.
that's a terrible model.
Yeah, part of the.
Welcome back to Questioning History, where guys with all the questions but none of the answers ask those said questions. But not today, because this is the round table. So we're loose. If we had beers, we'd be drinking them, but it's 7 a.m. for me.
God damn it, time zones.
And we're yet again here with CJ. And History Bros. So maybe you can tell our audience why they should go see your channel.
Part two.
All right, great. My channel, the idea is that I'm putting the story back into history, because I'm discussing a lot of East Asian history, which often in the West discussed without much context, much cultural context. What was only written in the historical official text, which is usually what the elites want to be written down. But I'm also discussing about the arts, the culture, how the people actually experience the history, how the small people actually remember it. And it would be a pretty good idea just to have a taste of what's how people in Asia actually interact with their own history, and what sort of new arts, or what sort of the culture they create out of their historical experiences, that sort of stuff.
Hearing you say this makes me think about today in a weird way, because like throughout history, you're completely right, and thank God that there's channels like yours that cover this perspective. But throughout history, I feel like history is not written by the winners, it's written by the writers, and the people who had access to writing changed throughout history, becoming broader and broader as we come closer to modernity, right? And I'm thinking about today. I'm thinking about all of the accounts of not exactly the people who are illiterate. I mean, it's not about literacy. It's about, do you put out your stuff out there? And I'm sure there's a huge parts of society today that is just not putting their stuff out there. So in the future, history of the 21st century might be written or taught from the perspective of vloggers and TikTok shorts and things like that. I mean, it is how it is. Like, if you look at the Victorian era, you start to get access to writings of different poems and different books that common people wrote. So it's all about like the writing something and hoping that it survives. But yeah, how does China, like, throughout the ages, is there sort of a difference in who writes, or it's always the elites?
The official history are written actually by the next dynasty, the dynasty that comes into power. Part of them gaining legitimacy.
That's a terrible model.
Yeah, part of the way they gain their legitimacy is by writing the history of the previous dynasty, and the lessons you can learn from it. Sometimes it's written pretty well, sometimes it's written in a negative way. It really depends. And that's why there is a lot of stories, like street oral storytelling, and all these different like opera performances. And that's why I discuss books like Romance of the Three Kingdoms and Water Margin. That is how they would like to remember it, and also the story that survived. Because what happens is that these stories, they evolve through time. The first Romance of the Three Kingdoms is a really short book, and they got plenty of magic and everything, and then they just brought it back, make it a bit more of a human and political drama. Over time, it actually gets better. So it's a crowdsourced storytelling too, told among history. I think we can compare it to Arthurian legend, Arthurian myths.
Greek tragedies too.
Yeah, Greek tragedies. Each time they are retold, there's always some changes. And I think, it's going to be quite interesting how it's going to interact with today's corporations stranglehold on IPs. How are IPs going to be, how are the normal people going to add their input into corporate storytelling? It's nowadays, it feels like the corporation always dictates the narrative and everything like that. We don't have as much like the people telling each other stories. I think social media can help a bit, or like what we're
Especially in
doing.
China, by the way.
All right. Yeah, and the thing is, with the problem is this may be a bit of a doomer sort of thought, but as you know, we put more and more of our work on the cloud. What happened if one day everything just dies?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I've had that thought, and it's an incredibly sad thought. You may end up in a situation where the 20th century has more historical writing than the 21st. It's
Mhm.
profoundly sad and bad, and we gotta start writing, man. Like I
Right.
even write on paper so much less now. And
Mhm.
the other thing I thought also is like I did a video recently on the Victorian era, and there is just a, you guys know this, like Japan and China have a lot of this, but there's so many memes, like actual memes, posters made at the time.
Yeah.
There's so many memes, and it makes me think like, and they're in history books, a lot of these memes, these caricatures of the great powers, like there's famous one of the Boxer Rebellion, right? um
Oh my God. Yeah.
Right.
I feel like
Right.
I wonder like historical books might actually have memes that we have now on 9gag.
Oh, they do. The cartoons from
Okay.
the like
Yeah.
19th century and the early
Yeah.
20th century, how they depict like, oh,
Yeah.
it's so good.
Yeah,
There's so
but,
much in a little
no, no, no,
cartoon.
no. Yeah, I'm telling you, in the 22nd century, the history books of the 22nd century are
The
gonna have
memes, yeah.
memes
Yeah.
of today, of the Russo-Ukrainian war, with the memes with the,
Yeah.
man,
The chat and the
that's gonna
virgin
be.
memes, soy
But
jacks.
let's bring it back from the memes, because we touched on something in the debate episode that was super interesting about the cohesion and the ethnicities of China. And to make it more grounded and establish like a base, it would be interesting to discuss how cohesive and one people were the Chinese people or the Chinese state, compared to, let's take a couple of examples, because pretty much every empire had multiple ethnicities, but what are the most famous ones, right? You
The
have,
memes.
no,
British
no, I
Empire.
mean the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, and let's give one more just for references.
Let's go with British.
Sure, so many ethnicities there.
Right, yeah.
Okay, so let's first talk about China. Delve into more of the ethnicities and what role they played into that.
Mhm. I think we are too stuck with the word ethnicity, because
Okay.
there has been so many different ways of like grouping people. Before we have ethnicity, we use race. Race used to be used for different races of European people, until eventually it's used for biological races, the Africans, the whites, the Mongoloids. It's the definition changes through time. If you want to read more about this, there is a book called Invention of White People. So how the definition of race changes throughout time, and it's really very politically driven. It's
Oh
mostly
yeah.
to justify slavery and all that sort of stuff. People need to be different for political purpose. If people are starting to feel quite negative about this thing, just turn it the other way around. Think about how much lies do they need to create to tell us that we hate each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the thing is, whether they are different or not, it's really politically divided. And it's defined by political groups, just like the Hutu and Tutsi of Africa. Yeah, the difference of these people, they are really magnified by the Belgians pretty much, to just create two different group of people. One of them, the elites that will cooperate with the Belgians to oppress the other. And now that we're in the post-colonial era, all this creation, this division still lingers. And the problem is, the new group of people, the new independent group of people, they inherited the division of the colonizers. But in previously, to even like during the Indian Mughal Empire, there was an attempt at trying to reconcile the Hindus and the Muslims. It's there was an attempt, I would say, even though there's still lots of persecution of the Hindus. But the thing is, when the British came around, they just further exacerbated this division by giving different privileges to different group of people. So what happened is that throughout history, this is not just what the British or European did. This is a really classic tactic. The Mongols did this, and a lot of different people. I'm sure China also did this. I guess the thing is that we have to beware of who those in power tell us who our enemies are, so that we should be able to make a more educated decision on whether we should hate or not. Because to be honest, I see the world as we have already entered the world of 1984. Today, our enemy is Eurasia. Tomorrow is East Asia, and it may swap again. So what can you do? Well, I would say that eventually, this group of people would be your friends again. So I'll just make whoever's history then. I'm just ahead of the curve.
I think we're making some good strides. And there's an unceasing desire for these divisions to being forced. I want to hear more out of Craig, but I have this story that fits what you said perfectly. Talking about the Aryan race, the origin of that. I oversimplified the story a lot, but I wrote a script about the Indo-European languages, and basically more than half of the world, either 45 or 55% of the world, speak one language group, which is the Indo-European language. And this was something that people did not understand or know or had any idea for centuries. And this group includes anything from not anything, but Portuguese and Hindi, for example. So one day, one of the two Grimm brothers noticed the similarities in some of the words between one of the languages in India and German. Okay, so he concluded that basically this is a race. Everyone who are they're famous for the Grimm story tales, which were written with the idea of creating not only, but part of it was a German identity, which didn't exist back then, right? And they used these stories, these folk stories that were told around the countries to kids to create a sense of Germanhood, which all the other nations around Germany had at that point. This was like 18th, 19th century. So by making this link, concluding that, the German language is very similar to this language in India, this is the Aryan race. And anyone who does not speak the Indo-European language is not a part of this race. And this race, because it includes all these famous empires, like it includes the Romans, it includes these guys, the Persians, they're superior. Because look, they made all these amazing civilizations. They were not a part of the political state. They were not a state at all. They were just two brothers telling children's tales. But what they did set the precedent, and later groups and states now officially built on this idea of Aryanism, which led where we know it led. So I fully agree with you that, you start off with a basic ignorance. They couldn't know, they weren't linguists. They didn't have the tools to understand what the Indo-European language tree was, where it came, how it migrated, who's a part of it, who isn't. They just saw a correlation and they went, guess this is a race. And then other states like that narrative, used it for their own goals. And here we are today, suffering the consequences. So it's so important to not be led astray by certain, thing that may seem true at the time based on your own arrogance or ignorance or bias, and not to run away with these thoughts, which may lead to dangerous places.
Yeah, this reminds me of the rivalry between the Turkic people and the Mongolian people. It seems that in my comment section, the Turks and the Mongols hated each other. It's like they just keep debating. These ancient people in China, all the different tribes, are they Turkic or are they Mongolic?
Yeah.
Depending on the language they speak, it's like it doesn't make sense, because language do get adopted. They do,
Yep.
and a lot of those states actually are multilingual. For the
Yeah.
Tanguts, for example, they have like a Tibetan, they have Chinese, and they have also their own Tangut language. Actually, the Tanguts, they are part of the tribes of the Tibetans who like traveled, moved into China because of political conflict, and then moved to northwestern China until finally they are destroyed by the Mongols, and they're gone. And since they move a lot so much, it's that their culture, even their genetics would have changed through time, and even their language would evolve. It's like, how can you say these are the same people, same race? It's just, I think they are just trying to justify their sense of superiority, to be honest.
I have one again. I'm really sorry, Craig. I'll just mute myself after this one, but it fits so well because this is really tricky territory, mind you. So you know how tricky the Balkans are, right?
You don't say.
Myself, I'm from Bulgaria, and Bulgaria has been notoriously been under Ottoman rule for almost 5 centuries. And that has created a huge amount of animosity, which part of it still remains today, in a very weird way. I won't get into that, but basically there's an anti-Turkish bias. And that Turkish bias gets expanded to everything Turkic, right? And Bulgaria has one of the weirdest origin tales. We know that there was a tribe of nomads that started off from the Hindu Kush, and throughout the centuries, they finally migrated into Bulgaria, mixed in with the Slavs, Christianized, became what is known to Bulgaria today. Now you're going to hear one of the most unsatisfying stories ever told, because what are these original nomadic Bulgars, or proto-Bulgars, as some call them? Well, they act Turkic, they speak Turkic, they dress Turkic traditions, Turkic everything, but all genealogical examinations and genetics show that they're not Turkic, right? But it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, and a lot of Bulgarians are like, because it's unfathomable for them to say that our origin has anything to do with the people who oppressed us for 5 centuries. And just same like you, I'm not trying to, but if I'm left with a situation where I piss off everyone, then I will, because the Turkish people want to say yes, Turkic ancestors, and the Bulgarians want to say no, something else that we don't know yet. And the truth is, it's kind of both. You can't take it away. And even if the genealogical examinations tell you otherwise, I feel like in those early phases of history, especially, culture is more important than ethnicity. Boom.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. Right.
All right, it's my turn to pitch in.
Yes.
I think the most
Taking
important,
the mic away.
the most important thing, and he had it right. It's what CJ was saying. Whatever the political narrative at the time is, dictates what is ethnicity, nationality, race. A nation state, you make up this nationality to keep a people together based off of X, Y, and Z. Other people see that nation state, they say, okay, so you're X, Y, and Z. We'll define ourselves as being not whatever you are. For example, like Canada, famously, we literally are just not American. That is our only identity. Or I work for an Aboriginal reserve. The way Aboriginal tribes used to see each other, they would have names for the opposite tribe, and that name could be completely different from what that tribe calls itself. The Ottawa tribe, for example, they called them Ottawa because they were over this range that they could see from, but the Ottawa tribe didn't call themselves that. Mohawks, the Ganyage Hagapios, the people I work for, they have a name for themselves that others don't call them. The others call them the Mohawks. That's the way they look. The issue of ethnicity and race, it's almost farcical now. I mean, we're seeing it today. We're living in this ugly period where there's people who are trying to not obsess about it, and there's people who are obsessed about it. It means everything, or it should not mean anything. And we should just be human beings,
That's brutal.
Well, but the thing is, it's funny because you have people who I don't want to be like the global, like they say, oh, there's the globalists. They want to melt everybody into one thing, right?
Yeah.
But if you don't have these histories and these nationalities, you don't have flavor, you don't have differences, something that it takes a group to be isolated from others to create something that we've never seen. There's reasons why certain culinary dishes are shown in certain parts of the world and not others, other than whatever they have on hand. And there's different cultures and heritages that just create things, and it's what makes us unique. And then we all mold together and we share these different identities and such. We come up with different reasons to kill each other. And it's so messy, but I think the most important thing is any given time in history, it's the political will of some group trying to use it to fit their demand or need. They say Adolf Hitler, for example, when he was writing Mein Kampf, the Aryan race is a made-up history he just came up with, and it's quasi history with a lot of bullshit written into it. I don't know if you've read Mein Kampf; it's hilarious. And his idea of what the Aryan race was somehow ends up having an origin with Germanic peoples, and it's just makes no sense. And then he writes about like the histories of the Japanese people, and it's like, what would you know? Anyways, and
what?
Like you said, he
does that a lot, by the way.
Oh, yeah. And the political narrative that he needed, he's like, oh, the German people don't really have a great history like all these other groups, so I'm just gonna make one up, and we're gonna make these people, we're gonna have this fake history, and we're better than everybody, and we just automatically need to conquer everyone else. And the Slavic people are for some reason evil, and they need to be destroyed, and it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, but there's two Slavic people that he doesn't want to destroy. Do you know who they are and why? This makes it interesting because you're saying fake, and I agree, but there's a hint of something there.
No, there's always the greatest lie has to have a little bit of truth.
Yeah. Of course. It's so fucking stupid because the two groups of people, spoiler, are Croatia and Bulgaria, which are allies. Croatia because it has more to do with Germany than Slavs, and Bulgaria because of the Turkic origin. Okay. He says that literally, like to vindicate why he's allies with Bulgaria. He goes, well, the Bulgarians are more Turkic than Slavs, and then the Soviets take over, and they put in the history books, no, Bulgarians are more Slav than Turkic. And it's so ridiculous. But if you want, you can clip this. Basically, I love this podcast, but it's like we isolate each other with made-up narratives until they become true. Like you give it long enough and you give enough obsession to those narratives and they become true. And it's the same with languages. Like we create dialects just based on distance. Like I've said this before, given enough time, Australian will be its own language. That's not a if scenario. This is how English is separate from French and French is separate from Italian. Like French, Italian, Spanish, they're all part of the Romance tree, but they are different languages because of time and distance. That's it. You can it's so crazy because distance is not even it. Like you can draw a line going from Lisbon to Rome, and it's not just about distance, it's about access to roads. So something as far as Lisbon will actually be closer to Roman Italian than something in northern France, because logistics, roads, and statehoods had to play into that. So we separate each other, we divide each other based on made-up narratives from states, which are entirely political, as the Hitler situation. So for some reason, if Australia tomorrow gets super pissed off with Britain or something, they're going to mandate some change to their language, and in 100 years, it's going to be its own language.
Yeah. Sometimes these divisions are really whatever is. They just pick up whatever is considered to be convenient at the time, because as we know, the Mongols, when they conquered China, they had like 4 castes of people, right? The Mongol is on top, and then the Semu people, the various peoples, the Turkic and others, so on, and then the Han people, and then the Southern people. The Han and the Southern people are actually the same Chinese people. The thing is that, what happened was that, previously, during the Northern Song dynasty, there was the Khitan Liao dynasty and the Jurchen Jing dynasty. They are trying to tell the narrative that they are actually the Chinese. Those Southerners, the Song dynasty, they are not quite Chinese, because they were really powerful. They defeated Song dynasty enough times so that they accept the title of son emperor, or sometimes a little brother emperor, to the emperor of the Khitan people. And then that's why the Mongols who are living at the northern, far north to the north of China, they pretty much like bought in the whole narrative. So once they conquered the Jurchen northern China, they call the southern Chinese the Song dynasty to be the Southerners. They are not even Han people anymore. So sometimes they just take a grain of narrative, sometimes created by other people, and just use it for themselves. They don't usually a lot of people just kind of imagine this mastermind to be someone who created an idea or a narrative wholesale from nothing. What usually happens is that they just pick whatever that's already available and just amplify it. They don't have to do
say
all
Macedonia,
the work.
don't say Macedonia, don't say North Macedonia.
Oh, really? Yeah.
You mean Greece?
I want to quickly shout out Craig's video, because two of the biggest perpetrators of what we're exactly talking about, really, if this topic's interesting to you guys, please check out the video that he did on how Japan basically influenced Korea and how Russia influenced Ukraine. Both once again, like, I know less about Japan, but I think both are states that in separate times they well, one of them till today really try to expand the ideology and bring it into their fold. Russia's actually really interesting in the way they do it. Like, we've had countless of people oppress, and no, you're Quebecian, you're not Canadian, but
Quebec.
Russia does it so interestingly, because it's like it promotes your culture, Slavic culture,
when it's a benefit to the state.
To certain degrees. Yeah, with Bulgaria, there was a ban. I'm talking about these nomadic people that I mentioned earlier. Anything after them, everything after the Christianization, fine, make all the monuments. They even poured in a lot of money into movies and theater and art schools all throughout the Soviet Union. They did it in a very interesting way, to a large degree successfully. Like, there was a general idea that, oh, we're part of this union. And what they did in Mongolia, I don't know that much about it, but what the Soviet Union did in Mongolia is very interesting. I know they use the Cyrillic to this day, even though it makes no sense.
The reason why I made that episode, other than the fact, I had to be part of, I don't know if CJ knows, this was called Project Ukraine. So we wanted to bring awareness. The point was to bring awareness to Ukrainian history, that it's real. And I was the Pacific War channel, so I had to somehow know something about it or breach on that subject. So I chose to compare how the Soviet Union treated Ukraine and how its identity versus how Japan treated the Joseon dynasty era, Korea.
Great video.
It turned out I knew, of course, I know a lot about Japan and Korea. I didn't know much about the Ukrainization process, but it turned out it was pretty good comparison. They both states went through a period where they promoted, for good or bad reasons, the other states' people, and then they tried to break them apart because of politics. And it's interesting.
How does Britain do in this department? Now, I've never thought about, because, like, overall, I don't know if you could say that their empire was a success or failure, because they don't.
I think it was a very large success during its high point. I mean, they were.
So did they try to do that? I know they made ties with a bunch of people they were in contact with in India and other places, but like, just creating a sense of Britishness.
No, it was forced. I mean, the Indians who had to fight in World War I and World War II were just, they weren't, oh yes, for the Queen. Even in Canada, it was like, why do we have to go to war for a European issue? No, in Canada, famously in World War II, we declared war a week after Britain, just to say that we were independent.
Wow.
Even though we still weren't.
So they failed with, they sort of, this is so interesting, because it's still part of the Commonwealth today of Australia and Canada, but like, I don't
That's
see
changing.
the same level of oof. I don't see the same level of you're part of us compared to the other states. Like look at the 13 colonies, look at Australia, look at
Well, it's
South Africa.
It's like CJ said, it's politics.
Mhm.
You have African nations that are
Mhm.
fighting to remain part of the Commonwealth because it gives them some sense of money and some stuff they needed to survive. Whereas you have nations like India that were absolutely brutalized and abused for for all of the period that they were, and they're like, "Give us independence, please. Give us independence, please." And they're screaming at,
Mhm.
this tyrannical empire. Whereas Britain can be very lenient. I live in Quebec, and I would have to argue, we were the most leniently treated people. When Nouvelle France was conquered by Britain, they
Yeah.
treated the Quebecois like princesses. They gave them everything that they wanted to keep them in the fold so they wouldn't rebel.
Huh.
And it's hilarious to this day that the history that you would learn from like Quebec is that they were brutal and they were oppressors.
Yeah.
No, go read a book about India. Like, yeah.
Yo, the Ottomans were pretty lenient too, and they didn't try to make everyone in the empire Ottoman. They
No,
were
they're
like, you are our
cosmopolitan.
subjects. Yeah.
Well, they just want
Wow.
tax revenue. Like the Ottomans were very practical about, hey, yeah, you're gonna have to abide by this. If you're not of the Islamic group, like you're gonna pay more taxes than the other guys. But
But you won't serve in the army.
yeah, we're not gonna mess with you too much. I mean,
Yeah.
Serbia would have a lot of things to say, but you know.
Yeah. Okay, so let's bring it back to China. So, which dynasty, let's make it like almost like a debate. Which dynasty was the most lenient in what we're talking about, and which dynasty was the most obsessed in trying to make everyone Chinese or
Uh,
create a sense of national identity?
well, that's kind of difficult. I would say, mm, I think the Tang Dynasty kind of succeeded in it while being the most cosmopolitan. So, which means that they have a really loose definition of what is Chinese. The thing
You're
is,
saying they're the most lenient, just to be clear.
uh, that's right, yeah.
Okay.
And the most lenient and the most successful,
Hmm.
ironically, which the thing is sometimes that's how you would succeed by being a bit more lenient with the definition, because the southern China, it was conquered around the Han Dynasty by Han Wudi, but they only really started to feel like Chinese during the Tang Dynasty, because that's what happened is that the Jing Dynasty, the elites moved south to southern China, and they started developing southern China, and then through all the chaos, eventually until it's conquered by the Tang Dynasty, a Sui Dynasty first, actually. And then when it's conquered by Tang Dynasty, they start to feel like one person. I guess it helps them develop their own sense of identity by having other people. Because what's often forgotten about Tang Dynasty is that there are tons of Turkic people in northern and northwestern China that's part of the empire, and they are run really loosely because they are nomadic people. They just go places and they pretty much become their mercenaries. While the Chinese are tilling the field, creating the wealth, the Turkic people are out there conquering almost all the way to Persia or northern India.
Hmm.
And the problem is they become so reliant on the Turkic people. And once they rebelled, they got the Andusan's rebellion. They don't have enough people inside within their border guarding themselves. They pretty much put all the military and army outside. And when they come into the Tang Dynasty, they pretty much collapses. Right. And the thing is, a lot of the culture of China nowadays, like for example, the law, the Tang Dynasty Code, that's survived, or mostly with some changes throughout the dynasties, all the way until the Qing Dynasty. So they created not just the poetry, art, everything, and also the law, practically the basic structure of China. So like Han Dynasty, they pretty much created a pretty large land area, a zone of control. But the idea of being Han, I would argue, only started in Tang Dynasty, because at the time, previously during the Han Dynasty, The Chinese, the Han is just a nationality. They are not an ethnic people. The southern China is only been recently conquered. That's why we have so many regional dialects in southern China compared to the northern China. And it was only during Tang Dynasty they feel like they are Chinese too. And
which dynasty was the most oppressive?
Impressive.
You know, it's funny. You could argue that the Qing dynasty is both very oppressive, but while at the same time they have to abide by a cosmopolitanism, like they have to. Eight banner system, for example, where they codified all these different groups to try and give them some semblance. But I mean, the Manchu are always put on top. They forced the Ku hairstyle. During the Qing dynasty, you know, you had to have that hairstyle. You had to really kowtow to the Manchu. I mean, they have, the thing is, it's like a minority group is controlling China, whereas the vast majority is quote unquote Han. So I would say the Qing dynasty has to be the most oppressive by definition, but I don't know enough. I know Ming, I know Yuan, I know Qing. I don't know so much about like Han dynasty. I don't know so much.
I have a question that might seem kind of stupid, but let's take a look at the countries around China that basically China failed to incorporate or influence so much that, like, Korea, to me, from what I know, is very distinct from China.
Yunnan province is very distinct from the rest of China, and they're kind of the last obscure province that have tribalism even during kind of like when the Qing are
Which
coming
one is
in.
that? Can you specify?
So you're looking like Vietnam kind of.
Okay, yeah, I was gonna ask, like, Vietnam is very distinct from China, Japan very distinct from China, and I also want to ask like about Mongolia. But in your eyes, can you explain? Is it a failure that Korea is not part of Japan, or more? Korea is part of China, or was it a part of China? Very not. It doesn't even need to be politically part of China. Like culturally, was there a point when Korea was extremely similar, or that never happened? And if it never happened, is it just terrain, mountains?
This will make some Korean people angry, but
let's go.
For a long time, you could mistake Korea as another region, like a place with a different dialect to the Chinese, just like perhaps Cantonese people to the central Chinese, because back then they also used the Chinese characters. It's only recently that they used the Hangul, Korean writing system. Even though it was created like a few hundred years ago, it fell into disfavor because of their elites, their Confucian elites. They try to stamp it down. It's a very funny thing. It's in Korea, Confucianism almost become a religion. It become really oppressive. While in China, they make shit up. They just keep changing Confucianism, but in Korea, that's why after the Imjin War, they were so surprised that they thought that the Chinese would be so Confucian. They look at the soldiers; they're so superstitious. They're Taoists, they're Buddhists. What in the world is this? It's a massive like culture shock to them. And it's what happened is that I think what happens, why China would want to conquer these places is because they are seen as threats. Because I would say the closer their culture is to the Chinese, the bigger issue there is. Because because what happens is that, you know, if one day the dynasty is destabilized, the Koreans come in and rule the country, the people won't see any difference.
Wow. So they want as few groups of people possible to be able to claim the mandate of heaven.
That's right. Yeah.
Wow.
That's from a lot of my readings and a lot of the way I look at history. It's always all these surrounding countries that they feel most threatened by. They may claim the mandate of heaven, and
so they are saying these people are part of us, but fakely, artificially, and then saying, oh, and these people are not part of us. So they're deleting borders and creating borders, cultural borders at the same time.
As long as they bring tributes, do the whole tributary thing, even though it's really the Chinese emperor paying to have friends come to that party, pretty much. They actually give back more to the tributaries, just as a show of, a show of, Asian people like to do this sort of shit. That's why they just keep paying everyone money at restaurants. It's like they have to treat everyone. They have to take the bill. This sort of like Asian mentality.
Wait, can you? I'm not aware of this. Can you explain this?
Yeah, because when you go to restaurants with Asian people, usually they fight each other to pay the bills.
This.
Yeah.
Aha. Okay. I thought I thought that the restaurant owner was paying their dinner.
Oh no.
Okay. Yeah.
Usually people
We have that too. We have
find-
that too a little bit here. I don't know why that is,
Yeah.
but
I think
yeah.
in more of a like they would have a bit less of that in like in America or like Western Europe, I think. Maybe.
Is that true, Craig? Like, do you, like if I'm out with a friend and he's paying the bill, it's kind of ingrained in me that I need to at least offer to pay it myself.
The customs and norms for what you're talking about have changed dramatically in the past 10 or 20 years because
Yeah.
like men always pay for women is changing, for example, in Western society.
Yeah.
But I was a waiter and a bartender for like 10 years of my life, and I can
Yeah.
say what he is saying is actually very true. I've seen scrambles at dinner tables with a large Asian family where they'll like fight to grab the bill. I mean, every
Wow.
culture does this nowadays, I think.
No, I mean in the Western world, like in Canada, like is that common?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, no, there's always a scramble to be the person who's generous to pay for everyone else.
Yeah.
I think I don't know if that's unified by all cultures, but I see that a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Well, I guess it's that sort of thing, but to be honest, it's a bit universal. The Huns, the Xiongnu also did it at that Kurultai, because they are trying to show off their superiority by bequeathing to the other surrounding tribes too. I think
Look at this giant tent. We have a great big tent.
Have you ever heard of the there's a few Aboriginal groups that do this, but it was basic, and it's seen in other cultures, but you as a chief leader, you put on a great feast for a lot of other tribes to show your abundance and wealth, but to portray your power, you are very generous. And the idea is, yes, you're being very generous and you're giving all the stuff to others, but it's to consolidate that you're the big head chief of a bunch of clans. I'm sure it's found in a lot of cultures, but yeah.
It was customary for when a Byzantine emperor rose to the throne to pay a humongous sum to the patriarch, like just for the ascension itself, huge bag of gold, and to throw out the feast and the halls. That's why ceremonies like coronation ceremonies are so full of splendor and glamour, just to affirm your own rights. And whenever there's a succession crisis and there's a couple of people rising right after another, that's the best way to empty out a treasury in any culture.
Yeah, that's right. And it's like I would say that what happens that because during the Ming Dynasty there was the ancestral injunction. They prevented the descendants, the following emperors, to attack surrounding countries. Actually name around like 10 countries or something. Vietnam was one of them. But it was still attacked later, which is quite funny because they waited until they changed their name and then they attacked.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Wow.
So there is this sort of like hooplas that they have to jump through to justify these attacks. What happens is that the problem with Vietnam itself is that there is a lot of like internal strife within it too. So what happens is that sometimes certain princes or certain groups want to use the Chinese emperor's power to get them the throne. So that they will send their soldiers to come in to put them on the throne, and they will pay tribute to the Chinese. Actually, this happens in like many other countries in the world.
Joseon and the Japan is the same. To have your emperor be recognized as an emperor meant that you had to recognize that China's emperor was one step above yours. But they recognized your emperor too.
Yeah, that's right. So they become the middle managers pretty much. It's better than being like just a commoner.
How severe was the retaliation if said emperor or even king said, "No, I don't recognize him as superior to me"? Is it a trade embargo or is it a full-on invasion?
Well, Japan famously they got trade embargoed, and then the pirate thing happened.
That's
So
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if it did. Did the Joseon dynasty ever do that, where they just refused tribute? Well, they were forced by Japan to refuse a tributary a few times, but did they ever by themselves? I don't know.
The Joseon, I don't think so, but there were like previous dynasties
Yeah.
before it. I think mostly Goguryeo and Baekje, they periodically enters and gets out of the tributary system because a lot of internal strife. Sometimes they think it would be beneficial just to get the money because usually they would what happens that they are not allowed to call themselves emperors, but back home they still call themselves emperors anyway. It's like nobody cares as long as they do all the theatrical at the Chinese court, then it's all done. But there is still a matter of prestige. They will lose prestige if they're part of this like theatrical. And but what happens is that even when they are embargoed, that's where the European traders come in. They will trade. The Chinese would trade with the Europeans, and then it gets sold to Japan, and which means that the Europeans get quite a lot of money for a really short trip back and forth Japan and China.
Yeah, that's why the Philippines was developed the way it was, and Macau and other places. I don't know if you've ever heard this, Gorky, but there was there was a famous altercation. So when the Meiji Restoration is just kicking off, and they've put this new emperor on the throne, they send a letter to the Joseon dynasty, and the letter is written in characters that indicate, "Hey, we have an emperor now." But they've put the Koreans in this horrible spot where if they acknowledge that, they're going against the Chinese and their emperor. So the Koreans are just like, they just don't answer, and it causes such turmoil. I mean, if you've ever heard of the Satsuma Rebellion, Saigo Takamori, he's one of the main guys in this, and he goes, "Oh, we should just invade Korea." And
this is crazy.
It's all because of a written character that indicated that, oh yeah, our emperor is like on the same level as the Chinese emperor, right? Korea, and the Koreans are like, we don't want to touch this.
This reminds me of the Franco-Prussian War, where Bismarck is like super ingenious, and he takes a telegram that's sent to him by the French king. Was there a king? I'm not sure. By the French, and he changes it in a way to so that like the French are dissing their own troops. And he publishes this everywhere, and the king is like, I really don't want to go to war with Prussia, I really don't want to do this, but all his advisors like, you can't let this stand, he's black, like he's talking shit about you, you got to do something. And the French are like, fine, we'll attack, and they get crushed. But on a bigger note, like I love this episode so much because it exemplifies why I love history, and why people should know history more. Because like you think of China and Japan, at least for where I'm from, and you can hardly imagine places that are more distant in your mind's eye, more far away, and culturally more distinct than you, and it almost feels like a different planet. And I hear these stories, and there's so much similarities, and we're all just humans, and all these things, whether they had connection with each other or not, they rhyme so much. Like the thing about the emperor is the same thing in Europe. Like there was such a big conflict of who gets to call himself emperor, and there's all these legal mumbo jumbos, like people wanting to call themselves emperor but not actually doing it, and the whole thing between the HRE and and Byzantium. We're all so similar, and there's so much to learn by studying history. I wish more people did it, and in a more nuanced way. Because the way most people learn history is isolated in bubbles and nationalistic and with agendas. The beauty of history is when you do this, when you compare the different periods and you see how similar they are. And there's obviously so many life lessons here about, we spoke about language, culture, war, art. There's so many interesting things to take away from history, and most people, because of what the states do, take it down to in my country, there's such a hatred for history where people just say, well, it's made up. It's not a real, it's
Okay.
not a real science. It's not a real thing. Why study something that's made up and is going to change all the time? And I'm
Like Albania.
and it just it's so sad, but lovely. I love the discussion.
Yeah, because I guess, you know, history is, it's really easy to change history just by when do you stop telling it. It's like how far
Yeah.
back do you want to go. If you just stop at the point where it benefits you, it's easy for you to create your own narrative. It's like
Yeah.
okay, so like your grandfather attacks my grandfather, my great grandfather attacks your great grandfather. So he there's always like there's always like retaliations or conflict between history. But you know, when do you stop telling the story? Because if you want to really go as far back as possible, it's like, who knows what really happened? Because with history, we are really just left with whatever is written. And sometimes even what is written is not preserved long enough for the rest of us to discover. Because you know, as you know, it benefits certain states, certain powers to preserve certain type of histories, even, you know, with the so that they have the at least the veneer of credibility by having somebody, by adopting a history written by seemingly independent persons writing. But of course, you know, there are other writers which they did not pick. That's the point. Yeah.
CJ, I'm gonna hate myself if I have you here and I don't ask you this.
All
I have
right.
a couple of hot takes that are a running gag at this point, and one of the more lesser known ones until this point is that I actually won't tell you the hot take. I'll ask you the question.
Okay,
Do you think that the Yuan dynasty, especially after Kublai, is run by Mongols, or are they completely assimilated and you can't call them Mongols anymore? When does the Mongol link stop for the Yuan dynasty?
This is the problem. To them, it never stopped. But but the thing is, you know, well, this is the problem, isn't it? It's like Mongols, and just like Alexander the Great, you know, when his generals established all these different kingdoms, when did they stop becoming Greek? I think we have the same question, because the Chagatai and the Yuan, they pretty much settled with their own group of people. They rather control their own backyard rather than try to fight with all their other relatives. So the thing is, you know, Kublai Khan's successor, according to the official history, he chose someone who is very well versed in Confucian literature. So after all this fighting, he wanted to have somebody to actually be able to run the kingdom. So that's why
didn't work out.
Well, it worked for a bit until you know, the Mongol elites become quite complacent, because they didn't really run the rest of the country well enough. Because what happens is that, you know, whenever there is a natural disaster, it would be a part of the massive PR campaign to bring like relief, all that sort of stuff. We see, you know, that's how they build up, you know, their name and their legitimacy, is to bring natural relief, or like control floods and all that sort of things. But because they didn't do that, and the end of the Mongol Yuan dynasty had a lot of these internal issues until they collapsed.
Yeah.
That's
do you consider Kublai a Mongol? Where does that line end?
Well, it's not who I consider a Mongol. I think it's more interesting to say what the Ming Dynasty writers, the one who wrote the Yuan Dynasty, official history of the Yuan Dynasty, considers him to be both Chinese and Mongol. It's a legitimate Chinese dynasty, but he is a Mongol person. Because if you go back through all the official dynasties, part of this is because, you know, they realize that they are not a unified ethnicity. Even like stories of, you know, because usually in the West, the story of dynasty starts with the Xia dynasty, Shang and Zhou, the three ancient dynasties. But in China, they have the stories of the three Augusts and five emperors, or three sovereigns of five emperors, depending how it's translated.
Mhm.
These are the mythical, legendary emperors, rulers. In every piece of story, they say that this tribe and this tribe, they combine together and form the Huaxia civilization. So throughout time, they know that they are not a unified group of people.
Mhm.
But with all this modern narrative, or we are united and everything, we can always find this sort of narrative in post-colonial countries, because they know they have been played by all these divide and conquer strategies. So they
Yeah.
have to recreate a unified nationality or ethnicity. This happens in like India, Indonesia, or other like Philippines, even all the post-colonial countries, they have to like unify themselves to defend against like future colonialization, that sort of stuff. And
Yeah.
sometimes these post-colonial countries can be as oppressive in implementing this unification uh,
Hmm.
as the colonizers previously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I never liked the idea, like a lot of people just go the Mongol invasion of Japan,
Mhm.
the Mongol failure of Japan, the Mongol failure of Java and Vietnam, and I'm like, okay,
Chinese
I get like the Mongols are built up to be this incredible military force, and you
Mhm.
want to bang your chest and say, well, see, I beat them, but in
Mhm.
my eyes,
Wow.
it's unfair. Like, why it should be the Yuan invasion of Japan at the very least,
Mhm.
which it was. Like, how many actual Mongolians on horseback were riding off these ships and attacking Japan? But it's the same thing we're talking about. We're talked about the unification factor where you're telling your people something, but there's also
Mhm.
unification factor of being against another group and saying, see, we beat you, even though you're notorious.
Yeah.
Mamluks and Egyptians beating the Mongols, which is also not true.
Still a sorry spot for you, eh? When they brought that up, I saw that episode.
Yeah. Like,
It's like, oh
but
yeah,
you
Japan had a great victory over the Mongols. It wasn't just the divine wind that just blew apart their
Mhm.
ships.
Yeah.
even that, like, do you call that a Mongol invasion? Which everyone do because it's
Wow.
clickbait and gets the views.
It
Yeah, that's
literally has that flavor. It's like the Mongols who overran everybody were finally coming after this little island,
Well,
and they were blown apart twice.
were those Mongols coming?
Wow. I mean,
Wasn't
they're
it mostly Chinese and Korean people?
it's a number of a
That's
lot of Koreans, a number of different people probably.
yeah. Yeah, even Georgians and everything, even like some Turkic generals too, because
Dude,
of the names of the because of the names of the people. The
yeah,
generals are usually Mongols, but yeah, the people fighting for them are various other peoples. But the same can be said because the actual Mongols is a really such a small group of people. Even the Mongols who went to Persia or anywhere else,
yeah,
they are not quite a group of completely full-blooded Mongols themselves.
yeah,
So it's like, where do we cut it off? When do
yeah.
they stop being quite the Mongol? Yeah, and this is
When you're
also the
talking
same.
about Russia and Europe, like, yeah, they had invasion forces of 100,000, sure. Who knows how many followers were among those 100,000, but say there are 100,000 Mongols. 100,000 Mongols in China is nothing.
Yeah,
It's a drop in
yeah,
the bucket,
yeah.
even
And
after all the massacres.
yeah, but in a lot of these empires, what they do is they turn people to their side. What happens is
Yeah.
that even when the Mongols started attacking the Jurchen Jin dynasty, who considered themselves to be Chinese too, so that's why the Mongols become Yuan dynasty after they conquered the Jin dynasty. So we're China now because we conquered the Jin dynasty, and they
Yeah.
considered the Song dynasty to be not China. Uh,
Everybody wants to be Rome or China.
yeah, exactly. That's the thing.
Much.
It's and the thing is, what happens is that they consider uh, the Japanese to be a supporter of the Song dynasty, so that's why they had to attack Japan. And I would say it's like the Mongols are playing Pokemon. Once they defeated a group of people, they capture their people and make them fight the other groups.
There was
this
also an envoy accident in Japan as well.
You know, Japan's notorious for screwing up envoy things and getting like a minor issue to the forefront, causing a major war.
Yeah,
Yeah.
or making excuses for a war as well.
Oh yeah, Japanese love. Yeah, they love to do that.
But which
but
wait, hold on, which other envoy did they fuck up?
Well, so you got when they invade during the first Sino-Japanese War, it's a fight over Korea, and it's the Japanese messing around with envoys to just break Korea away from China, and it's like a Game of Thrones situation, and they continuously do it. I mean, my God, there's the invasion of Manchuria later, and it's just assassinations, coup attempts, and killing of envoys or sending envoys in to do things.
Okay, let me ask you two a question. Picture China and Japan in the let me pick a good moment. World War One time, around that time. Or no, let's say 100 years ago, 1922.
Mhm.
Between 1922 and now, which country changed more, you think? Because both of them changed tremendously.
Dramatically,
That's really difficult to
those are
answer.
two of the biggest changers in the world. You've
Yeah,
got,
yeah. You look at them today.
Mhm.
Who's changed more?
you're talking about one going communist and one going from an imperial warring machine to kawaii Japan.
How do you even measure that? It's like,
Yeah, but you gotta pick one. Like an alien asks you this, or a time traveler asks you this. A time traveler from 1922 comes up to you and says, "Oh, you're from the future. Who changed more?"
Oh my God.
Oh, this is so tough.
it's so
This
tough.
is
Yeah.
so tough.
I don't know, maybe China, I would say.
China.
Yeah.
I'm
I'm
trying
trying
to
to think of China 1922.
Mhm.
I'm
It
trying to
was a
think of
mess,
like
right?
who retains their culture more.
Mm.
And
Mm.
it's hard. I guess China changed more.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
Japan, I mean Japan, when it's the late Hirohito era, when it becomes like it's a bastardized version of Japan that exists for a brief amount of time, where they're just this weird evil empire, and now they're docile and different. I don't even know. Like, I
Mm.
guess China still.
Damn.
Mm.
It's hard. They're two ridiculous extremes. Like one goes
Has
from
anyone is anyone on that level in terms of change? Who would you put like in that same caliber? Like America changed a lot, but not nearly as much as those
Not
two.
in the last 100 years. Yeah.
No, not in the last 100 years. Britain, lost its empire, but
yeah, but its society didn't change. They fought to keep the empire together in World War II. That's all they cared about, was holding on.
Mm.
Germany. Think about Germany in 1922. Russia didn't change much.
Yeah, it's really difficult.
There's got to be someone. Hold on. We're missing something big. Someone really big. I feel it. Indonesia. Mm,
Mm. Mm.
mm,
Maybe Singapore. That's it was a small fishing village. It becomes a
yeah.
bit of a economic powerhouse there.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good one. But it's not on the same scale as Japan and China though.
Yeah.
They really are the most ridiculous.
Yeah.
And it's funny because they're intertwined with another. They caused kind of each other to do, like Mao Zedong would not have come to power if it wasn't for the Japanese like breaking China so much to allow him to build up, and he defeats Chiang Kai-shek. And then
Yeah.
Japan was brought to its knees, and their constitution was formed by the United States, and they had to admit the emperor wasn't a god, and it just changed the fabric of Japanese society. It was a ridiculous shift from World War II to what it became.
I think we have to like distinguish change for who. Is it for the elites or the normal people? Because I think in relative terms, I think the living standard of Japan 100 years ago, they are relatively like a middle income country for the commoners. But I guess to the elites who need the emperor for their justification to rule, the world pretty much changed a lot for them. But like in China, I think now with all the economic developments, the commoners' life quality have changed tremendously. They would have like that whole world would be like completely different. But as for the elites, I don't know. It's like elites are almost the same everywhere.
True. Yeah, that's why you're right. It's definitely China that has the greatest change, because you have to take into consideration the plight of the commoner. And China, I mean, well, this is the most ridiculous example when you become a communist country.
Speaking of change, and maybe we can wrap this up. The other day I was thinking about the end of the samurai. I was thinking about, I don't know, maybe this is a redundant thought and it's not that interesting, but because I don't know that much about the period, maybe I'm wrong, but think about this. For centuries, the samurai class, all they had to do was train for battle and do poetry, basically, right? And generations lived and died, never having completed their purpose. And then a war erupted, and the generation that was training for this war their entire life got crushed. But in a way, it's like you're playing a video game that you lose to a bunch of hackers. How depressing, how fascinating is that thing, that the evaporation of that class, one, and two, is this overblown? Was there a gradual change in that class?
Yeah.
And okay, tell me about
it. I mean, I'll talk more like the Bakumatsu period and the emergence of the 18th, 19th century. The samurai became, like you said, it was peacetime for Tokugawa when it was sakuko policy and the country was closed. Yeah, they were writing poetry, but what else were they doing? The daimyo were all checked. The shogun was ruling. There was little.
Were they trading?
Yes, of course. But what happened was the economic system was messed up in a way where you had koku. There was like a certain amount of rice that was given to daimyo, depending on your status with the shogun and who liked who. You got more, and they didn't really have like a good economy. So the samurai became indebted to the merchant class, which was seen as a lower class. And you had all these in-debt samurai. The merchant class rises up by the turn of the 19th century, and they're the powerful ones because they have all these samurai in debt at their whim. So the samurai were a bunch of like in debt poor guys who are it's not what you like. Way back in the Middle Ages, yes, the samurai were great, legendary Sengoku period, like it's amazing. They control the daimyos or the samurais who rise up and such, and then they end up being these bureaucrats. When the Meiji Restoration happens, it's like, guess what, commoners are allowed to have weapons and commoners are fighting in the army. You're not special anymore, all your privileges are gone. So the samurai become like businessmen. They join, a lot of them join the army, but they've lost everything. The Sago Takamori, the last samurai, he puts on this like extravagant end to the samurai class, sort of, but they had been done for a long time.
Really, I love context like this. So they're not these Spartan mythological figures always.
It's not like there's like a moment in time where they're gone. It gradually they changed over time, and there's a lot of misconceptions about samurai, like the use of the katana, and like it's overly shown. Like the samurai are like horseback archers more so in history, and it really depends on the time period. Like Tokugawa Japan, you have a bunch of poetry writers. Like,
and usually with all these historical changes, we can see the impacts or even the trauma in their writing and in their literature, and even like modern media today is like in the idea of a warrior who has lost their sense of purpose. We can see that in one of the Metal Gear games, when they started building mercenary without frontier or something like that. Soldiers Without Frontier, when Solid Snake created a group where soldiers, people who only know how to fight wars and battles, can turn that place into their sanctuary. So they will just go wherever they are needed. So this idea of a group of warriors who lost their sense of purpose is become part of their trope of their story that they keep telling. That's why, if you look at the stories and of different cultures, there are always like tropes or different plot points that mirrors that history. Yeah. So this is how this also how they imagined how their history is reimagined throughout the new media, pretty much.
I had a professor explain it to me like this about the samurai. The Greek tragedies that taught of like the Trojan War, the contemporaries writing about these events believed that they were actual history, and then they adopted it, and then they made themselves like the Spartans made themselves like they were like these Trojan warriors, and it's not like it's a fake history, but these are stories. The samurai, the story of the samurai, it influences what later generations think is samurai. And like classically in World War II, Bushido is dramatically bastardized, and they make it to be this thing that it is really not, and they use it as an excuse to do terrible things and such. And it's funny he was bringing up Metal Gear, because it's like Saigo Takamori, he he wanted an expedition into Korea because he wanted to give the samurai a death, a place that they could go. And he even said to like the government, he's like, these samurai are not functioning in society anymore, they're disenfranchised, throw them over at Korea and let them treat it like the old days and run it like it used to be. It's
Damn, that's some Valhalla shit.
Well, he died with the rest, 500 guys on a hill in Satsuma domain. Shiroyama, he gave the samurai the death that I guess they wanted.
Yeah. Live by the sword, die by the sword.
Sorry,
all right, boys.
You hear my parrots? They're like screaming because they're waking up.
A little bit, but we're wrapping it up anyway. CJ, I can't say how much I appreciate you coming on. I hope you had a good time. For all the viewers, Cool History Bros, please check it out. It's something you don't expect. It's something different, and really deserves the more views.
Really, thanks a lot to you guys for inviting me. It's a really fun talk, actually. It's like I haven't had this much fun on a podcast ever. So it's a really good opportunity, and yes, thanks a lot for giving it to me.
Pleasure, man.
This has been Questioning History. Till next time.
Bye, guys.